Okay, so first things first, there are two parts to the AP Lang exam. The first part is the multiple choice. You have about an hour for, I think it's 45 questions. Do you know, is it 45? It's around there.
47.
47, okay. They might throw some extras in there, just like ACT, I think they do some sampling. Then you sit for 2 hours, and in those 2 hours you do 3 essays. That sounds like a lot, 3 essays in 2 hours. And the best thing you can do is practice. So I have opened up 2 more rounds of practice that are open through the 5th. I didn't want to open them all the way through the 9th so that you could get some sleep and you're not studying all that time. So feel free to do that. And if you do the essays, feel free to let me know. And if I have time, I'll grade them. I just can't promise that I'll grade them. Yeah.
What's the practice on? Is it on College Board?
Yeah, so I've set all of that up in AP Classroom, and we'll see how that goes. And yeah, so feel free to take either section. However, one thing that we want to note is that the multiple choice counts for about 30% of the exam. The 3 essays count for about 70% of the exam. So when you think about an AP test is worth 5 points, you need 3 for most colleges to get credit, or to pass the exam you need 3. You can get a 3 and still fail the multiple choice portion. You can get like a 40% on the multiple choice section and still get a 3 on the exam. The multiple choice portion, not super important, only there to boost. And the types of things that you want to know for the multiple choice section run right into what you need to know for the second type of essay that you're going to do, which is the analysis essay. So let's just dive into the essays, because that's where all the money is. I went ahead and pulled the first practice that we did, and you will have all 3 of these essay types, and you get to choose what order you take them in. So don't be intimidated by the one that you don't want to do. Maybe you want to do that one first, maybe you want to do that one second, maybe you want to do that one third. So the first one that will show up is what they call the synthesis essay. The second one that shows up is what they call the analysis essay. The third thing that comes up, I'll call it the free write essay. Typically, what I think is tricky when you take this test is if you're doing the synthesis. Yeah, I know, great timing, right? At least they're doing it on a Saturday, unlike every other day of the week when they're doing it. So the synthesis essay is essentially a research essay where they give you all the research. So this one is space exploration has historically been led by government programs with public funding, but in 2004, the United States legalized privatized space travel. Since then, private industries have been investigating ways to make up exploring space both affordable and profitable. Critics of privatized space exploration believe that the cost of space travel are too prohibitive to be worthwhile for the general public. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of those sources and develops your position to the extent of which privatizing space exploration is beneficial. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 sources and develops your position to the extent of which privatizing space exploration is beneficial. So they give you a prompt like that, and then they give you 6 sources. They want you to cite, but cite is very informal on this. All you have to do is say like source A or McCarthy. Like they're giving you the information on how to cite. They just need that basic thing, so you don't have to worry about MLA or anything like that. And they kind of give you like, here's how you want to show your sites. It's very, very basic. Just put them in parentheses. always make sure you're using evidence, blah, blah, blah. This should be no problem for all of you, right? You're doing something much more complicated right now. You're already writing a much more complicated essay on stuff that you've found and you've crafted. They are giving you all the tools to do that here. So you can do everything you need to. You can outline, you can read through the sources. If you're worried about time, this one might be the last one that you do, because they suggest that you read through all 6 sources, but I think we're all aware enough to say, I don't need 6 sources, I only need 3, so I don't need to read through all 6. I can find the ones that work for me, right? So you can kind of move around. And if you look at the types of sources they have, yeah, most of them are gonna be essays, but they're also gonna have things like this graph. They have a cartoon in here. That's one of their sources. So there are other things that you can kind of look at and understand a little bit about what the topic wants. This one, I'm gonna say generally, they don't care what your viewpoint is. However you support it, they're looking for you to support it with evidence. You know how to do that, right? So the synthesis essay should feel really familiar to you. You've written essays like this before. Here's what's gonna feel uncomfortable. How should you write this essay? 5 paragraphs. Write a 5-paragraph essay. You all know how to do it. That is exactly what the AP test wants. They are not interested in interesting structures. It's actually not part of AP to teach you interesting structures. All they are interested in is, can you write a 5-paragraph essay? And can you do it competently? So I'm sitting here thinking, if I've got to do this task, I'm gonna find my 3 sources. They're gonna be my 3 body paragraphs. I'm gonna come up with my thesis statement. It's gonna be super clear. I'm going to go thesis statement in my introduction, clear, clear, clear. Then I'm gonna restate it all in my conclusion. I'm gonna walk away happy, right? We'll talk about this a little more with the scoring, but what you want to recognize is there's a quota for the scorers. They have to get through so many papers in so many hours. So I just signed up. This will be my first year as an AP scorer. They've asked me, how many hours do you want to work the week that you are scoring? And it's like up to 40 hours, right? So I picked like 30 hours or 32, I think. And they will give me a quota. Here's how many essays you need to get through in each hour. And it's gonna be like 25.
Whoa.
So you are reading fast. The reader is reading fast. And so what do you need to do as a writer? Convince them that you are clear and that you know what you're doing immediately. That is what they are looking for. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more with the scoring as we go through. Second question, or second essay type. This one is where we as Afton students have typically struggled in the past. This is our analysis essay. They might even give you the same passage as one of your multiple choices, but they will give you a passage. That passage is usually a speech or an essay. I think one year they used like one of de Tocqueville's essays. And you are to analyze it based on rhetorical style. So if you look at the prompt, the United States participation in the Second World War began in 1941 and lasted until the Axis powers surrendered in 1945. During that period, on September 24th, 1942, Congresswoman Claire Booth Luce delivered the following address: the role of the American woman in wartime, to a woman's banking committee. Read the passage carefully. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Luce made to convey her message that women need to prepare make more sacrifices in a war effort. In your response, you should do the following. Respond to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible position, analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. Provide select use of evidence to support your line of reasoning. Explain how the evidence supports your line of reasoning. Demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation. Use appropriate grammar, punctuation, and communicating your argument. So again, how are you gonna write this 5-paragraph essay? The tricky part about this is the rhetorical devices. So let's talk rhetorical devices. What are they?
Well, I know rhetorical is like when you're trying to persuade or something, right?
So if we think of rhetoric is just reading and writing,
Oh.
right? Specifically speech and writing. So when we talk about rhetoric, it's just what writing tricks is the author using? That's what you're asking.
Isn't irony one?
Yeah, so let's go through, because you don't think you know many, but you know a ton, right? So when you think rhetorical devices, what's one of the first ones that comes to mind? Okay, so we have literary devices is a subset of rhetorical devices, right? So if you think metaphor, simile, et cetera, all of them are rhetorical devices. The tricky part here is if you just identify metaphors, you'd better be really, really good at it, because metaphor is a little milquetoast. It's a little light compared to finding something like synecdoche, right? So if you want to impress your grader, you're gonna find harder terms that this person has used, right? So the tricky part here, how you study for this test, comes down to how many literary devices do you have. That's part of it. What else? What are other types of rhetorical devices?
Sarcasm.
So we have things like irony, or satire, or sarcasm.
Isn't, like, the pathos, logos, ethos?
Yep,
in
we
this
have
part?
ethos, pathos, logos. Those are all rhetorical devices. So here's something that I want you to keep in mind. Ethos, pathos, logos, probably not going to score you super well. However, much better than having nothing, right? Much better than forcing something that you don't really understand. So you always in your back pocket have ethos, pathos, and logos, which should be in any essay, especially any speech that you're given, right? You should always be able to find ethos, pathos, and logos. So worst case, you're using all three. Best case, you don't need to use any of them. Somewhere in between, I really want to talk about pathos because it so clearly impacts this essay. So pathos makes a whole lot of sense, but I also want to use a couple other devices. Right? Can we think of some other ones?
Symbolism.
That would go in
Oh.
devices, but yeah, symbolism.
Would logical fallacies be in there?
Uh-huh. This could be a place for logical fallacies. And remember, we talked about logical fallacies in a couple different ways, right? We talked about them as a writer or as a thinker, you want to avoid them. But we're also very aware that speeches and propaganda are likely to use logical fallacies on purpose to trick an audience, right? So if you can make that connection, especially if you can use the terminology, this is a great example of slippery slope. Here's why it's slippery slope. Here's what it's doing inside of the essay, right? Then your money, you're working pretty well there. Others that we might think about rhetorical question. Again, kind of a basic one. What's Miss Cartier's favorite? Parallelism, parallel structure. Remember that from last year?
Is that different Is that under literary devices, or is that?
It is a rhetorical device. And if that parallelism is a really good one because it's all about the structure of the essay or the structure of the writing, right? I'm using that parallel idea over and over and over again. And I could use the word repetition, but parallel structure is gonna sound much better to a reader, right? So again, you know all of these. You just might not remember the names of them. So this is what you study.
Wait.
Yep.
In this essay, we like use these devices to like
Yep.
analyze their stuff,
Uh-huh.
and we have to tell them like this is parallelism, and this is.
So I'm gonna write this essay, what's her name? Luce uses, parallelism, satire, and metaphor effectively throughout her speech to convince her audience of blah, blah, blah. In paragraph 1, I'm gonna talk about how she uses parallelism. I'm gonna say, that good old sandwich, here's an example of parallelism, here's what it's doing, and here's the quote, here's what it's doing in the speech, here's why it's important, and then I'm moving on, right? So again, super formula. Use that super formula that you've been taught forever and forever. That is what the AP test wants. You can see why this one's the toughest for most Afton students, because we don't just sit down and term all the time, which I think you guys probably like, that we don't just term all the time, because that's not super important. So now, this is the thing that you kind of bone up on. This is where you find good study cards and all that stuff. Go to Quizlet, look up AP Lang terms, you'll be fine. You can probably recognize all of these things just fine, you probably just don't know the names. How we doing so far? Pretty good? All right. So, again, you might want to do that one first because that one might be the biggest pain for you. The AP test is a lot like any other standardized test in that test creators know that you're gonna get tired, right? They know that you're gonna get tired as you're taking a 3-hour test. It's a 3-hour test with a 10-minute break. Like it's an experience, right? So when you're taking this test, they do kind of anticipate that you're gonna go Essay 1 to Essay 2 to Essay 3. So when we get to Essay 3, which again I kind of say is the free write, very much like an ACT writing or an SAT writing, one of the first student orientation initiatives at a local university is to collect incoming students' cell phones and keep them for 48 hours. The purpose of the initiative is to give students an opportunity to integrate into their new culture, school culture, and make friends on campus. Carefully consider the effects of this initiative and the extent to which they might support, complicate, or contradict its intended goals. This is total open runway, right? You get to decide what you want to say, how you want to say it. You get to create your own prompts, your own examples, right? Your own anecdotal evidence, all of those things. So a lot of students, when they hit this question, they just go crazy because now it looks like you have freedom to write the way that you want to write, except you don't have freedom to write the way that you want to write. They're still expecting a 5-paragraph essay. So you want to carefully consider this question the same way that you carefully consider other questions, which is to slow down, kind of think about what are my points, what are the things that they kind of expect to see, or what are my experiences and how can I best explain them. But then you're going back to that, I need a clear outline that has a thesis statement, 3 sections, a conclusion. I want my sections to have at least one piece of evidence that I've sandwiched in there with, this is what my idea is, here's the example, here's why it's important, right? All that stuff. Yeah.
So how do we come up with like evidence for this one?
That's good. Let's actually run through this one, because I think this one's kind of easier to run through than the other ones. What would be, anybody have an immediate opinion?
They shouldn't do it for safety reasons.
Okay, safety reasons. Why? What's a safety concern?
They're on a college campus without any way to contact anybody.
Okay. So let's explore that further. How might you argue that effectively?
Like they're unfamiliar with the area, right?
Yeah, you're unfamiliar with the area. We're used to having phones to be able to get in contact with people if we need something, right? You're all college people, so I mean, let's face it, there's some nastiness that can happen pretty early, right? You know, there's potential for sexual assault and all types of other stuff, fights breaking out. Not that we would expect that, but that is certainly, if I'm a student, I might be thinking that. If I'm an administrator coming up with this policy, I might not be thinking that way, right? Any others? Any other ideas? Let's stick with why it's a bad idea.
They've never met the people, so they don't know like which teacher they could trust if they did need something.
Oh, I think this is just students.
Oh.
You're just like, this is like a mixer event for 48 hours where you don't have your phone. Yeah.
Let's say their goal gets accomplished, like they make friends. How do they stay in contact with those
Yeah.
friends?
I think that's a really good one that you all would think of, that like an administrator putting this thing together would not. Like, your whole lives are through your phones. Taking that away makes you super uncomfortable, and you don't really know how to talk to each other without that device anymore. And like, why should you? I think that's the other one. Like, why do you want to take away what our college experience will be in 2 days? Right? That might be another one that you kind of think about. So how, like, do you have an anecdotal example of how to put that together?
What is anecdotal?
Like a personal example? Do we have a personal example of when they've had to have their phone taken away and how different life is with it, without it?
When I'm on punishment.
Maybe like a punishment, something like that, right? Like circumstance. I don't think I told you guys, but like I woke up, not last night, I woke up on Thursday night, like in the middle of the night, and checked my phone, and my phone like bricked. It died, completely died. And then like the next day, like all of Friday, I was like, I don't know how to live without my phone. It's really bizarre. I didn't think I was that addicted to it, but like surely I am. So I could easily talk about that experience, right? Which leads me to, does anybody not have a clear experience, or you can't think of something immediately? What do you think?
I don't have a clear experience.
Okay.
That's what
Anybody else not have a clear experience? Guess what? You can lie. You can lie. They don't know who you are.
Right, exactly.
They don't know you haven't had experience. Sometimes they ask like these really interesting questions like, is competition good or is competition bad? Like they do ask questions like that. That was one on a former practice. And the best ones I had were where people like told a story, right? They were like, here's an example where competition really ruined my life. I had a good friend, we were competitive about grades, and this happened and this happened and this happened, which is a 5-paragraph essay. They sculpted it into a 5-paragraph essay. And because it sounded real, there seemed to be real evidence to back that position, right? But I had other people who were like, I don't know, I've never had that instance before. And it's like, then lie, just lie. They don't know who you are, right? They don't know that you didn't have a little brother who died when he was 5 and that it traumatized you forever, right? Come up with the craziest story you can if it's gonna make your point. I love that this is gonna go out to the world. Okay, you know how to do this, right? So don't get fixated on, I have to tell the truth. You are writing an essay, you are making a point, right? It is not very important that you're being honest in this case, you're writing to a test, right? So if you can make that point, that's what they're looking for, which I think is appropriate. So again, lie if you need to lie, it's not a big deal. Oftentimes, I think the other trick to this essay is sometimes the essay is leading you in a direction. The prompt is leading you in a direction. In 2016, was it? No, I'm sorry. It was the 2017 exam. This question was, do you think it's possible to have a world leader who has no experience? That was the prompt, which was like, gee, I wonder who they're talking about, right? Which is hilarious that the AP test was just like, let's shoot some shots at Donald Trump. And one of my students kind of walked out of that and told me, you know, it was really, I love that you gave me the advice because clearly they wanted us to talk about him. That was very obvious. And even though I did not agree with the prompt, I just drove right into it. It was much easier to give them what they clearly wanted than to be contrary, right? And I'm not sure how that would work on a grader, but I am almost positive that if I'm looking at same answer, same answer, same answer, same answer, same answer, and then I get a different answer, right? That different answer had better be really good. Because I'm speed grading, right? So if that's gonna throw me off my track and I have to really reconsider it, then that answer had better be really, really good. Whereas if I'm seeing the same thing, the same thing, the same thing, and I've already given that a 6 out of 9, then I'm probably gonna give it a 6, a 6, a 6, a 6, a 6, right? That's probably how I'm grading it. So realize that there is a human being on the other end of this test, and you can game that human being, right? Can you see where a lot of people probably mess up with this? Yeah, because it seems like it's just an opinion piece, and it kind of is, but if you just go, bleh, then you're gonna lose all your points on this one. So I think that happens to a lot of people. They just don't quite know how to do this. It's the last one that they do because they go in order, and so they kind of just are tired. They're not thinking about it mechanically. They don't stop and take a breath and all of those types of things, and they just go, all right, now I'm just gonna spill out whatever I've got, right? So just know, I'm not gonna do that. Again, you might think this is the easiest one, and you might want early success, and so feel free to pick the one that you think is easiest and do it first. If you need that early success, you feel like I need to feel successful on this test, I'm gonna pick the one that I think I can do the best on first. The opposite strategy, I'm gonna do the hardest one first. And I'm gonna leave the easiest one for last so I can coast at the end of this test, right? I'm gonna use all my brain power early. And then I'm just gonna remember to make sure to format that last one properly, and then I'm gonna coast, right? Whichever strategy makes the most sense to you. I would hope that you determine that prior to walking into the test. This is the strategy that I want to use. Yep.
Is this on paper or on computer?
We have, I think when you signed up, we had a preference, right?
I don't remember that.
We had to express it as a class, so I'm pretty sure we went with online.
Thank God.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we went with online.
Takes so much time.
Yeah, I mean, this used to be all by hand, so you can imagine that was not always great. And we don't do a lot of writing by hand, so then handwriting plays into it and all those other types of things, so we don't have to worry so much about that. Other questions so far before we get into, yeah?
So since we get to choose like the order, where is the testing gonna be?
That is a great question. They'll probably use the upper gym. I think they've done that in the past.
So sick. Are we like, so they'll just put us in the upper gym and then they'll give us time to write our first essay and we get to choose whichever one and then we just, where do we?
So on test day, for all of your AP tests. You show up to school, they will tell everyone who's taking an AP test, here's where you meet, usually it's in the commons. Obviously you're not going to classes that day. They will tell you that you're supposed to go to classes before or after the AP test. You do you. I don't think anyone's ever been upset by somebody who takes an AP test and says, I'm pooped, I need to go home. But you know, if that happens, then, you know, let us know and we'll say something about it. So typically what they do is they kind of get you all together. They'll say X, Y, and Z to you, they'll take you to the testing location, and then depending on the test, like this one has 2 parts, right? So you sit for the multiple choice portion, then you have 10-minute break, and then you come back and you sit for the essay portion. And when you get the essay portion, you are able to move to any of them just like you are on the screen. So you can pick when you get to that essay portion, this is, I wanna look at all 3 prompts and then I wanna decide, or,
So there's no like, you should be done with the first essay, it's just like all the way straight through and then they're like done? And then-
right,
oh,
yeah. So if you wanna time yourself, you can time yourself, and say, well, essentially 2 hours is what, 120 minutes, so that's about 40 minutes an essay. So if you wanna think about it that way, you can think about it that way. I think, again, one of the good reasons to do a practice is because it probably feels like that is a whole lot and that you can't do it. But almost every time I have people do practice, they finish at least 10 minutes early. And those are my long test takers, they finish about 10 minutes early. So don't be too intimidated by that 3 and 2 hours is very, very doable. Other questions before we get into some of the scoring?
How long do we have for the multiple choice?
60 minutes. I think it's 60 minutes for about 45 to 47 questions. It might be 50 minutes, but
And
it's
those,
still less than a minute a question.
those questions are like localized stuff?
Those questions are gonna deal with a lot of these types of things. So it will feel a little bit like taking the reading portion of the ACT. But the reading portion of the ACT is asking you comprehension questions. This will not. It'll ask you questions like, Luce used this line, is this best represented as this term, this term, this term, or this term? You can use your same test taking strategies that you use for everything. Use that. There are 2 answers that are probably not very good, and then there are 2 answers that are pretty good. And at least you got a 50-50 chance there. They're not gonna be as obvious as like EOC and ACT, where the 2 that are bad are like clearly really bad answers. They won't be that obvious, but they should be obvious enough for you that you can pare them down. So I would really make sure that you're using that process of elimination strategy when you're getting there. And then again, the rest of it's just knowing terms. If you know terms, you're gonna be okay. Other questions while we're stopping for questions? Ooh, Luke's here. Okay, well, let's take a break. I can pause the video and then we can come back and I'll talk about scoring. And then that's the bulk of what we do. So, all right, yep. Grab food if you want some food.
Thank you.
Pizza.